The Zarnethi warship loomed in the cold, endless stretch of space, its sleek metallic surface gleaming beneath the distant stars. A group of Zarnethi officers, known for their ruthless efficiency and advanced technology, had been hunting down human vessels for weeks. Several of their ships had mysteriously vanished within human-controlled space, and now the Zarnethi were determined to uncover the cause. Their investigation led them to a single human vessel drifting aimlessly through the void. The ship, battered and damaged, seemed lifeless, a perfect target for the Zarnethi's relentless pursuit. On board, there was one survivor, Ethan, a human who had once served as a military strategist, now a prisoner of the Zarnethi. His ship had been ambushed by an unknown force, but he had managed to fight back fiercely, narrowly escaping death. However, his luck had run out when the Zarnethi found him, their superior technology overwhelming his every attempt at resistance. They took him without mercy, dragging him aboard their warship. Inside the cold, sterile confines of the Zarnethi ship, Ethan was confined to a small, dimly lit cell. His arms were bound by high-tech restraints that nullified his strength, but his mind remained sharp. His captors, the Zarnethi, were formidable, an advanced race with towering intellects and an unyielding drive to conquer. But Ethan knew one thing for certain: the Zarnethi had underestimated humans. In every human encounter with other species, the Zarnethi had discovered the same thing. Humans were unpredictable, and they could not be easily broken. Ethan had no intention of giving them the information they wanted, and though they believed they had him in their grasp, he had a plan of his own. As the minutes stretched into hours, the Zarnethi officers prepared for the interrogation. Their interrogation methods were infamous, designed to break the spirit of even the strongest creatures in the galaxy. They believed in control and fear, believing these were the tools that could extract anything from a prisoner. But when they began their efforts to interrogate Ethan, they were met with an unexpected calm. Despite the threat of pain and punishment, despite the daunting presence of the Zarnethi soldiers around him, Ethan remained unnervingly composed. The Zarnethi were baffled. They had expected a different reaction. Humans were typically known for their emotional outbursts, for breaking under pressure, for fear that clouded their judgment. But Ethan was different. His eyes, sharp and calculating, met theirs with a steady resolve that made even the most seasoned interrogators pause. They tried every tactic at their disposal: threats, promises, and advanced technologies designed to probe a person's deepest fears and weaknesses, but nothing seemed to affect him. Each attempt only seemed to strengthen his resolve. The more they pushed, the more Ethan's silence became an act of defiance. To the Zarnethi, this was puzzling. They were accustomed to extracting information quickly, to bending any mind to their will. But Ethan's resistance was unlike anything they had encountered before. It was as if the human was a wall they could not break, a puzzle they could not solve. Ethan's mind raced as the Zarnethi tried to manipulate him. He was a soldier, trained in the art of survival. He had faced death countless times before, and this was no different. He could sense that they were desperate now, but that desperation only made them more dangerous. Still, he didn't flinch. The Zarnethi's attempts to break him were futile because they didn't understand one fundamental truth about humans: they were more than the sum of their fears. Even when faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, they would fight and they would survive. And though Ethan knew he was merely a pawn in their game, he had learned long ago that a pawn could turn the tide of battle, given the right circumstances. The Zarnethi had hoped to use him as a tool, to extract information about human military tactics, but they had no idea what they were dealing with. Ethan was not just a soldier, he was a survivor. And it was this survival instinct that they had underestimated. As hours turned into days, Ethan began to realize something that disturbed him even more than the physical threats. The Zarnethi had their eyes set on him for a reason, not just for his knowledge, but because of something they couldn't quite grasp. His calmness, his resistance, was something alien to them. It was not the fear they expected. It was not the panic they had trained themselves to provoke. It was simply a quiet, unshakable confidence, a human trait they would soon learn to regret underestimating. For now, the warship remained silent, but something was building in the shadows, a tension between the alien captors and their defiant prisoner. The Zarnathi would soon discover that in their pursuit of answers, they had captured far more than they realized. They had captured a human who refused to be broken. The cold, sterile air of the Zarnathi warship hung thick with tension as Ethan sat in the holding cell, his hands bound tightly to the chair. His body ached from the harsh treatment during his capture, but his mind was sharp, focused. He knew what was coming. The Zarnathi were relentless, and their interrogation methods were legendary. The thought of the pain didn't faze him. He had been through worse before. His resolve was unshakable, and he had one simple goal: to survive. The Zarnathi wanted information, but they wouldn't get it from him. Not easily, anyway. His mind raced through countless scenarios, plans within plans, as he sat there waiting. His calmness seemed almost unnatural to the guards who watched him from the shadows. They expected fear. They expected desperation. But all they saw was a quiet, defiant human who sat motionless, seemingly unaffected by the inevitable torture that awaited him. The door to his cell slid open with a low hiss, and a tall Zarnathi officer entered. His name was Wren, one of the most feared interrogators in the fleet. His icy blue eyes gleamed with cold determination as he approached Ethan, a confident smirk curling at the corners of his lips. Wren had interrogated countless prisoners over the years, breaking them all. He had perfected the art of extracting information, using advanced technology and psychological manipulation. But there was something about this human that irked him. Ethan was different. The Zarnathi officer's voice was low, almost polite, as he began his questions. "Tell me, human, what do you know of the attacks on our ships? Who sent you?" Ethan didn't respond. He simply stared at Wren, his expression blank. The interrogator's eyes narrowed in irritation. He expected this defiance. It was common among prisoners who thought they could resist. But what bothered him was how Ethan didn't seem afraid. He wasn't trembling. He wasn't pleading for his life. Ethan just sat there, as if he were already dead inside, as if nothing could break him. Wren's patience was thin, and he wasn't in the mood to play games. He activated the first of his tools, an advanced neural disruptor designed to scramble a person's mind and force them to reveal the truth. The Zarnathi officer watched as Ethan's face contorted in pain, his body jerking in the chair. But even as the machine worked, Ethan's gaze remained steady, his lips pressed tight. The pain, though intense, couldn't break him. Ethan didn't give an inch. Frustrated, Wren turned off the device, but his cold smile never wavered. "You're strong, human. I'll give you that. But it's only a matter of time before you crack. You can't hide your secrets forever." The Zarnathi officer left the cell, only to return moments later with a new tool, a device that would induce hallucinations, showing the prisoner their worst fears. The images projected into Ethan's mind were designed to break the strongest of minds, showing them the people they loved, the things they cared about, being torn apart. Ethan's eyes flashed with brief pain, but his expression didn't change. He refused to scream. He refused to beg. In his mind, he wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about how he would survive, how he could escape. He knew he couldn't break. He had been trained for this, and more importantly, he had been prepared for worse. Watching from a dark corner of the room was Kira, a young Zarnathi guard who had been assigned to watch Ethan. She had seen countless interrogations, but this one felt different. She was used to seeing captives scream, to watch them beg for mercy or give in after only a few moments of pain. But not this human. Ethan's stoic silence, his refusal to yield, unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. There was something about his resilience that made her question everything she had been taught. She was trained to be ruthless, to believe in the superiority of the Zarnathi, to think of humans as weak, inferior creatures. But here was a human who seemed anything but weak. Kira's eyes followed Ethan's every movement as the interrogations continued. She had never seen anyone endure this kind of pain with such composure. The Zarnathi had always believed that fear was the greatest weapon. They used it to control, to manipulate, to break their enemies. But Ethan didn't fear them. Instead, he gave them nothing. The longer she watched, the more she felt a growing unease in her chest. She had been trained to view humans as little more than tools, enemies to conquer. Yet, here was Ethan, a single man, surviving everything they threw at him. And something deep inside her started to shift. Was this how humans truly were? Resilient to the core, able to endure pain and torture without losing themselves? Or was there something more, something she didn't understand yet? As the hours stretched on, Kira couldn't tear her eyes away from Ethan. She felt something stir within her, a mixture of curiosity and confusion. It was becoming harder and harder for her to view him as just another prisoner to be broken. Ethan's strength, his calmness, was beginning to unravel something in her, and she wasn't sure what to make of it. For the first time in her life, she began to question the certainty of her beliefs. Ethan, still silent and unwavering, could feel the weight of Kira's gaze. Though he didn't know it, he was already beginning to make an impression on her. The interrogator's methods, though harsh, didn't break him. And now it seemed they had done something else, something neither side had anticipated. They had started to change the heart of one of their own. Days passed, and Kira found herself drawn to Ethan in ways she couldn't explain. It was an unsettling feeling, like a small crack forming in the wall of her beliefs. She had always been taught that humans were weak, primitive creatures, nothing more than prey to be captured and controlled. The Zarnathi had perfected their methods of interrogation, using fear, pain, and psychological manipulation to break down their enemies. Yet, Ethan remained a mystery. Unlike the other humans they had captured, he didn't show the desperation, the fear, or the screams that accompanied their interrogations. It was his eyes that intrigued Kira the most. She'd seen the way other captives would break under the pressure, their eyes dulling as hope left them. But Ethan's eyes were always filled with something more, something deeper. There was hope in them, a quiet but unwavering determination that made her question everything she had been taught. With every failed attempt to extract information, Ethan's resistance seemed to grow stronger, and Kira couldn't help but wonder if humans were truly as weak as the Zarnathi had believed. The more she watched him, the more she felt herself slipping away from the certainty she had once held. It was confusing. Kira had been raised to see the Zarnathi as the apex of civilization, the masters of the galaxy. They were the ones who controlled, who conquered, who broke their enemies. And yet, here was a human, a mere prisoner, who was doing the breaking. Ethan wasn't just resisting, he was making them question their superiority. She couldn't understand it. It made no sense. How could a human, someone so small and fragile, stand against them so fiercely? The other guards and interrogators had lost patience long ago, but Kira couldn't stop watching. There was something in his quiet defiance that called to her, something that made her feel uneasy. And as the hours dragged on, that unease began to grow into something else, a strange curiosity. One evening, after another failed attempt to get anything useful out of Ethan, Kira was tasked with delivering his meal. It was a simple task, one she had done countless times before, but tonight felt different. There was a tension in the air, a silence that weighed heavily in the hallway outside Ethan's cell. The usual sounds of footsteps, orders, and commands were absent, and the ship seemed oddly still. She stood before the door for a moment, her hand resting on the cold metal handle, unsure of what she was feeling. It was as if something was pulling her toward him, something beyond duty, beyond her training. Kira took a deep breath and opened the door. Ethan was sitting on the floor, his back against the cold wall, his eyes closed as though he were lost in thought. The usual defiance was still there, but tonight there was something else, something that made Kira hesitate. She stepped inside, carrying a tray of food, but as she entered the room, she could feel the tension between them. It was a tension she didn't understand, a kind of silent communication, as if the two of them were finally seeing each other for the first time. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ship's engines in the background. Then, to Kira's surprise, Ethan's eyes opened and he met her gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only an unspoken understanding. He didn't look at her as a Zarnathi guard. He looked at her like a person, like someone who had been through the same struggles he had. His voice was low but steady, carrying a weight that made Kira pause. "I know more than you think," he said, his tone firm but calm. "You'll never break me." Kira stood frozen, the tray in her hands suddenly feeling heavier. She had expected Ethan to speak, but not like this, not with such certainty, such quiet strength. It was the first time he had addressed her directly, and the words hit her harder than she anticipated. There was no pleading, no bargaining, just a simple truth. The human was unyielding, and in that moment, Kira felt a shift inside her. She wasn't just watching a prisoner anymore. She was looking at someone who had been through unimaginable hardship and was still standing. For the first time, she realized just how strong humans truly were. Kira blinked, her breath catching in her throat. She wasn't sure what to say. The words she had been trained to say, words of control, of dominance, seemed hollow now. The more she looked at Ethan, the more she began to see the complexity beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't just a prisoner to break. He was a person, someone who had lived through battles, survived loss, and refused to give in. And Kira couldn't help but feel a strange sense of admiration. It wasn't just his strength that moved her. It was the quiet way he carried it, as if he was willing to endure anything to protect the pieces of himself they couldn't touch. For a moment, Kira stood there, speechless, her mind racing. She had always believed that the Zarnathi were the superior species, that their strength came from their ability to control and break others. But Ethan's words shattered that belief in an instant. His defiance, his strength, made her question everything. Was it possible that the humans were stronger than she had been led to believe? Was it possible that this prisoner, this enemy, was more than just an obstacle to overcome? Kira didn't have the answers, but in that moment, she realized something important. Ethan wasn't just a human to be broken, he was something more, and she couldn't stop thinking about it. As the days passed aboard the Zarnathi warship, Kira found herself drawn more and more to Ethan. At first, it was curiosity, an itch she couldn't scratch. She had watched him endure interrogation after interrogation, each one more intense than the last, yet he remained unbroken. It was more than just his physical resistance that intrigued her. It was his eyes, the calm, unwavering resolve that spoke of a history Kira could never fully comprehend. Every time their gazes met, she felt a strange pull, as if there was something about him that she couldn't ignore. Unlike the other Zarnathi soldiers who saw humans as weak, as prey to be captured and controlled, Kira saw something different in Ethan. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was a survivor, someone who had fought and endured against odds unimaginable to her people. His strength wasn't in his physical power. He was smaller, weaker, in comparison to the Zarnathi, but it was in his spirit, his ability to keep going when everything else was against him. She found herself wondering, for the first time in her life, if the humans had something that her people lacked, a will to survive that nothing could break. Over the next few days, Kira couldn't stop herself from watching Ethan. She kept her distance, always careful not to be seen by her fellow guards, but she couldn't help it. There was something magnetic about him, something that made her question everything she had been taught. The Zarnathi had always believed that their strength lay in their ability to dominate, to control and break those who stood before them. But Ethan was different. He didn't fight with his fists or with weapons. He fought with his mind, his resolve. She had seen him endure unimaginable pain, and yet he never gave in. It was as if his mind was locked away, a place that even the Zarnathi couldn't reach. She couldn't help but wonder, how could a human, a being so fragile, possess such strength? It was on the third night that Kira found herself standing outside Ethan's cell once again. But this time, there was no food tray in her hands, no orders to deliver. This time, she simply wanted to talk. Her heart pounded in her chest as she hesitated before entering, unsure of what to expect. She knew the risks. She had been warned countless times about the danger of sympathizing with prisoners. But something inside her pushed her forward, an unexplainable urge to connect, to understand. As she opened the door, Ethan looked up at her. His expression was neutral, but there was something in his gaze that told her he knew why she was there. It wasn't the usual look of defiance or contempt he had given the other guards. This time, his eyes seemed almost curious. The silence between them stretched for a long moment before Kira spoke, her voice hesitant. "I wanted to talk," she said, her words sounding strange in her own ears. She had never imagined herself in this position, speaking to a human as if they were equals. Ethan didn't say anything at first, but he didn't look away either. He simply nodded, a silent invitation to continue. And so Kira began to speak. She told him about her life aboard the warship, her training, her role as a guard. She spoke of the Zarnathi way of life, how they were taught to view humans as inferior beings, weak and primitive. She told him about the pride that came with being a Zarnathi, about their history of conquest and dominance. And for the first time in her life, she found herself questioning it all. Ethan listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. When she finished, there was a long pause. He spoke quietly, but his voice carried a weight that made Kira feel as though she was hearing something important. "I'm not like the others," he said, his voice steady. "I've been through things you can't imagine, but I'm still here because I refuse to let anyone take that away from me. The Zarnathi, they think they can break us, but they don't understand. We don't give up. We never do." Kira was struck by his words, and she found herself asking a question she had never even considered before. "Why?" she asked, her voice soft. "Why do you fight? Why do you keep going, even when it seems like everything is against you?" Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment, Kira saw something in him that she hadn't expected: vulnerability. "Because," he said, pausing as if choosing his words carefully, "if you give up, then you've lost. And I'm not ready to lose. I fight because it's all I have left. It's the only way I know how to survive." Those words hung in the air between them, and for the first time, Kira realized that she wasn't just talking to an enemy. She was talking to someone who understood what it meant to survive, what it meant to fight for something more than just physical strength. She saw him differently now, not as a prisoner, but as someone she could relate to. And as the hours passed, the conversation flowed more easily between them. They spoke of their worlds, their struggles, and their dreams of freedom, of peace, of something better than what either of them had known. The more Kira listened, the more she felt a connection forming. She had always believed in the superiority of the Zarnathi, but now, in this small, quiet moment, she found herself questioning everything she had known. When Kira left Ethan's cell that night, she felt something she couldn't explain, a sense of unease, but also a strange hope. The Zarnathi had always seen themselves as the pinnacle of strength, but Ethan's words had planted a seed of doubt in her mind. Perhaps the Zarnathi way of life wasn't as perfect as she had been taught, and perhaps, just maybe, there was more to humans than she had ever imagined. The decision weighed heavily on Kira's mind as she moved through the darkened hallways of the Zarnathi warship. The more time she spent with Ethan, the more she realized how wrong she had been about the humans. They weren't just weak, helpless creatures to be subdued. They were survivors, fighters with a resilience that the Zarnathi had underestimated. Ethan had shown her that humans could endure pain and hardship in ways that people could not understand. His unwavering spirit and the strength in his eyes made her question everything. She had always been taught that the Zarnathi were superior, that their power was absolute, but now, with every conversation, every glance, Kira was starting to see the cracks in that belief. The Zarnathi were focused on extracting information from Ethan, thinking that their advanced technology and methods of torture would break him. But what they didn't see, what Kira had come to understand, was that Ethan wasn't just holding out for the sake of resistance. He was playing a longer game, one that could change everything if only he had the chance. Kira began to wonder, what if they didn't have to fight? What if they could work together, find a way to negotiate, to end the conflict without more bloodshed? The thought made her heart race with a mixture of fear and hope. It was then that she realized there was a way to make that possible. If she could help Ethan escape, they might be able to turn the tide of this war. She had seen firsthand how powerful his will was, how resourceful he could be. If they could get off the ship, maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to bring the humans to the table, perhaps even negotiate a peaceful resolution. But to do that, Kira would have to take an enormous risk. She had never broken the rules before, never even considered defying her superiors, but now she felt as though she had no choice. Her conscience was pulling her in a direction she never thought possible. She couldn't stand by and watch more blood spilled. That night, after her shift, Kira snuck away from the main halls and into the storage room where the Zarnathi kept their weapons and supplies. She was nervous, her heart pounding in her chest, but she knew what she had to do. Her hands trembled as she picked the lock to the weapons cabinet. Inside, she found a small handheld plasma pistol and a set of keys to the holding cells where the prisoners were kept. Kira's mind raced as she hid the items in her uniform and left the storage room as quickly as possible. Every step felt like it could be her last. If anyone found out, if she was caught, the consequences would be severe. But her conviction was stronger than her fear. Hours later, when the ship was quiet and most of the crew were off duty, Kira made her way to Ethan's cell. She arrived just as the ship's engines hummed softly in the background, the sound filling the otherwise silent hallway. Ethan was sitting in the corner, his head resting against the wall, eyes closed in contemplation. For a moment, Kira simply watched him, her heart aching with the weight of what she was about to do. She had never imagined herself in this position, but now, standing here in the darkness, she knew there was no turning back. With a glance over her shoulder to make sure no one was watching, Kira approached the door to Ethan's cell. She inserted the key into the lock, her breath catching in her throat. The door clicked open, and she stepped inside, closing it quietly behind her. Ethan's eyes snapped open, but before he could react, she held up a hand, signaling him to stay silent. "Get up," she whispered urgently. "I'm helping you escape." Ethan's expression was a mix of confusion and disbelief. He had been planning his own escape for days, but he never expected anyone, especially a Zarnathi guard, to help him. But there was no time for questions. "Come on," she'd urged, her voice low but firm. "We don't have much time." For a moment, Ethan just stared at her, still unsure whether he could trust her. But something in her eyes, something raw and genuine, convinced him. Slowly, he stood, his body still stiff from days of confinement. Kira handed him the plasma pistol, and with a quick nod, they both slipped into the shadows. The warship's labyrinthine corridors stretched before them, and Kira's heart raced as they moved silently, each step careful and deliberate. The ship was vast, with twisting hallways and hidden stairwells, but Kira knew it well. She led Ethan through the maze. Each corner they turned, bringing them closer to the outer docks, where the escape pods were located. But it wasn't going to be easy. As they neared a control station, they heard the footsteps of a patrol approaching. Kira's breath hitched, and her pulse quickened, but without a word, she gestured for Ethan to hide. They pressed themselves against the wall, holding their breath as the Zarnathi soldiers passed by. The tension was unbearable, but they managed to stay unseen. Once the patrol was out of earshot, Kira exhaled, her body tense from the close call. As they continued their journey, Kira couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. She wasn't just helping Ethan escape anymore. She was beginning to feel something she couldn't explain, a deep, inexplicable bond. He wasn't just a prisoner to her now. He was a person she cared about, someone whose survival mattered. And with every step they took, that bond grew stronger. They were getting closer, but they both knew that getting off the ship wouldn't be the end of their fight. It was only the beginning. But for the first time since she had met Ethan, Kira felt hope that maybe, just maybe, they could change the course of the war and find a way to stop the endless cycle of destruction. The tension in the air was palpable as Kira and Ethan neared the escape pods. They had come so far, through hidden corridors and close calls, but now, just as freedom was within reach, the ship's alarm blared to life, echoing through the metal halls. The shrill sound sent a jolt of panic through Kira's chest. They had been discovered. The realization hit her like a cold wave. The Zarnathi were known for their precision, and there was no escaping the consequences of her actions now. She had betrayed her people, her entire way of life, and as the sound of footsteps grew louder, she knew she was standing at a crossroads, her past and future crashing together in one pivotal moment. Ethan turned to her, his face a mixture of surprise and urgency. "We have to go now," he said, his voice low but filled with determination. He had trusted her, and she could see the flicker of hope in his eyes. She had given him a chance, and now she had to take one for herself. But Kira's heart was torn. She had once believed in the superiority of the Zarnathi, in the unquestionable strength of her people. But now, with Ethan standing beside her, her old beliefs felt like distant memories. Would she go back to a life of cold loyalty, or would she walk away and forge a new path with him? Before she could answer, the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. Kira knew who it was before he even stepped into view. Vren, the Zarnathi interrogator, his tall, imposing figure filling the corridor. His eyes locked onto Kira with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You," he growled, his voice thick with anger. "You're the one who helped him escape." Kira's hand instinctively went to the weapon at her side, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan stood beside her, his body tense, ready to act. Vren's presence was a reminder of the life she had left behind, the duty she had once sworn to uphold. But the reality of the situation hit hard. She had already made her choice. The only question left was whether she would survive the consequences. "I didn't expect this from you, Kira," Vren spat, his tone cold and accusing. "You've betrayed everything we stand for." He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers, his fingers tightening around the hilt of his weapon. "You've chosen a human over your own people. You'll regret this." Kira felt a surge of emotion rise within her. Regret? There was no room for regret in this moment. She was done with the lies, done with the Zarnathi's arrogance. "I don't regret it," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "This isn't who I am anymore." Vren's face twisted with rage, and without warning he lunged at Ethan, his claws bared. Kira acted on instinct, stepping between them just in time to block the strike. The impact of their weapons colliding sent a shockwave through her body, but she didn't falter. She couldn't. Not now. With a swift motion, she drew her plasma pistol and aimed it at Vren, her finger hovering over the trigger. "Step back," she warned, her voice low, but filled with a new kind of resolve. The words felt foreign to her, as if they had come from someone else, someone stronger. But it didn't matter. All that mattered now was protecting Ethan and ensuring they both had a chance to escape. Vren hesitated for a moment, his eyes flicking between her and Ethan. He had always seen Kira as a loyal soldier, someone who would never question her orders. But now, as he saw the fire in her eyes, the conviction in her stance, he realized that he had lost her. His grip tightened on his weapon, and for a moment, it seemed like he might strike anyway. But just as quickly, Kira made her move. She fired a warning shot into the air, the sound of it echoing through the halls like a thunderclap. "Leave us," she commanded, her voice unwavering. "You'll never stop us." The Zarnathi interrogator's face contorted in fury as he slowly took a step back. For a moment, it seemed like he would attempt to charge again, but the realization of Kira's resolve dawned on him. He would not win this fight. Not today. "This isn't over," he hissed, his voice seething with anger. Kira didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew this was only the beginning, but in this moment, she had taken control of her own fate. She had chosen a new path, a path of resistance, of standing up for something greater than herself. With a final glance at Vren, Kira turned toward the escape pods, signaling for Ethan to follow. They had no time to waste. But as they moved forward, her mind raced. This would not be the end of their journey. The Zarnathi were powerful, and they would stop at nothing to hunt them down. But for the first time in a long time, Kira felt something she had thought lost, hope. And with that hope came a new purpose, to fight for something that mattered more than her old life, more than the Zarnathi's cruel empire. Together, with Ethan by her side, she would forge a new future, one where survival wasn't just about power, but about choice. The escape pod's hatch closed with a heavy, mechanical hiss, sealing Kira and Ethan inside the small, cramped space. Kira's side burned from a wound she had sustained during their frantic flight to the pods. Blood trickled from a gash on her arm, but it didn't matter now. They had made it. She glanced at Ethan, whose face was etched with exhaustion and relief. He had been through more than anyone should ever have to endure, and yet, here he was, alive, breathing, and sitting next to her in the cold emptiness of space. For a moment, they didn't speak. The only sound was the hum of the escape pod's systems, keeping them alive in the vast, lonely void of the universe. But even with the silence, there was something unspoken between them, a connection forged through hardship, survival, and a shared will to keep fighting. Behind them, the Zarnathi warship that had once loomed so large now began to implode, a distant, fiery spectacle visible through the pod's viewports. Her entire life had been spent in service to the Zarnathi, and now she was a defector, an enemy of everything she had once known. The weight of that choice pressed on her chest. She had betrayed her comrades, her commanders, her entire way of life. The Zarnathi would not forgive her. They would hunt her down relentlessly. Yet, as the pod drifted away from the dying ship, she didn't feel regret. No, there was something else, something liberating. In the quiet of space, with nothing but the unknown ahead, Kira felt free for the first time in her life. She had chosen a different path, and that path was her own. Ethan, despite his own pain and the scars of his own ordeal, seemed to sense her inner turmoil. He looked at her, his blue eyes steady and unyielding, and gave her a small, weary smile. "You did the right thing," he said softly, as if reading her thoughts. His voice, though quiet, was filled with conviction. "We both did." Kira turned her head to meet his gaze, and for the first time, she saw him not as a prisoner, not as a human to be interrogated and broken, but as a survivor, as someone who had fought for his life just as she had. He had been through hell, captured, tortured, and nearly broken, but here he was, still standing, still fighting. Just like her. They were survivors, in every sense of the word. The weight of their shared experiences had created an unspoken bond between them, one that neither of them had expected when they first met in the cold, metallic halls of the Zarnathi warship. Ethan's words echoed in her mind. We both did. They had both fought for their freedom. They had both defied the odds, faced down impossible challenges, and made a choice to live, to escape, to move forward. And now they were here, alone together in the vast emptiness of space. There were no guarantees. They had no plan, no allies, no home. The future was uncertain, and the universe, with all its dangers and unknowns, stretched endlessly before them. But Kira felt a glimmer of something new in her heart, a sense of purpose. She wasn't alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next. The pod drifted silently through the stars, leaving the burning remains of the Zarnathi warship far behind. But the journey ahead was just beginning. As they floated through the vast expanse of space, the stars seemed to shine brighter, as though the universe itself was offering them a new chance.